Hi everybody. So this is a tutorial as actually a recap rather than as a sort of follow through for the session. This is a recap on actually what we did in the session yesterday. So we'd had a request to do some color grading, to look at some color grading. And obviously color grading is a big topic. So what we thought we'd do is just start with some sort of elemental bits. And unlike a lot of the color grading tutorials that you see on YouTube or wherever, where they start with beautiful flat high resolution footage, which obviously color grades really well. What I thought we'd do is actually take some crap footage, stuff that hasn't really been shot very well, and see if we can't use color grading to try and make it a bit more exciting and kind of rescue it a little bit. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So included in Moodle, and it was when we were trying to open it up in Chrome, it wasn't downloading properly, but if you open it up in Safari, it should be fine. Is this clip of me recording my EP a couple of years ago with my band, and I only used it because it was a clip that I just had to hand when I was preparing the session the day before, but as you can see, it's not a particularly great clip. You know, it was shot by my bass player, who's not a professional cinematographer, as you might be able to tell. Luckily, bits of it are in focus, so that's good. And you know, actually, as a clip, it doesn't work too badly. But as you can see, there's a horrible color cast to it, and it's quite noisy because of the low light and all the rest of it. So we're going to try and use this sort of slightly shoddy clip and see if we can't use some color grading to try and improve it and rescue it a little bit. So here's what we're going to do. First of all, we're going to take our clip, we're going to move it onto our timeline as we've done, and then we're going to switch up at the top here to the color workspace. Okay, now the thing about the color workspace, what it does is it gives you your lumetri controls over at the side here. Now I've moved my effect controls down here already. Normally your effect controls are up here. I don't know why I just closed that down, that was silly. I'm going to need that in a minute. Normally your effect controls are up here, and you can just pick it up and drag it down so it's a bit more visible, because what you're going to want to also use in your color workspace, in addition to the lumetri effect controls over here, is over here you've got your scopes, your color scopes. So yours probably doesn't look like this when you first turned on Premiere. What you might have is a waveform. So this is a waveform. If you remember, a waveform is like an advanced histogram. It shows us how bright and how dark the scene is, but it actually shows us it from left to right. So whereas a histogram is just a graph that shows us sort of black pixels on the left, white pixels on the right, and how many grey pixels in different shades we've got in the middle, this actually shows us frame by frame what our image looks like in terms of bright and dark. So yours perhaps looks like this with the Luma channel, and then the sort of RGB laid over the top. So the way to fix this, if you want yours to look like mine, and this is my preferred setup with the vector scope as well, is you can right click on it, and first of all you can just ask it to say, instead of waveform type, which is RGB, which is perhaps what you're seeing as the whole thing, you can right click and you can ask it to go waveform type just Luma. And then what you can do is you can also right click and you can say, yeah, I want my vector scope. So YUV vector scope, which is this one, and I also want my RGB parade at the bottom. And you can move these around by sort of double clicking on them to move them around inside your window. So I quite like this format because you've got your vector scope and your Luma waveform here, and you've got your RGB parade at the bottom here where we can see it. So if we remember the way that a waveform works, then, as I say, it shows us different values of pixels within the scene, and it goes between 0 here and 100 here, and 100 is white and 0 is black. So anything that's sort of on this line is then black pixel information, and anything that's up here is white. Okay, so first of all, just to give you a sense of that, basic, if I go to my basic correction tab, don't actually do this yourselves, this isn't the bit that I want you to do, but just to illustrate how this works, if I drive my blacks down, can you see how it's now flatlining on the bottom here? It's not going any further than 0, and what's happened is there's all these areas of just peak like total black now, where there's no information at all, you know, so this is just black, there's no data there whatsoever. Yeah, same with whites. If I push the whites up, you can now see that there's these areas of overexposure. Yeah, so that might be my guitar, that might be the keyboard and the clock and everything in this part of the video. Yeah, so what we're going to try and do first of all, before we color grade, is we're going to want to use our correction tools to get our image looking as good as possible, not as I don't mean as good as possible in terms of its aesthetic value, how good it looks, but what I mean is as balanced as possible, so that when we start color grading, we're not fighting against like a color cast or a bad exposure or anything like that. We want to get it kind of looking good first of all, in terms of like a nice flat basic image, and then we're going to color grade. Okay, so just as a quick example then of how this sort of works, if we play through our footage, first of all, can you see this line here? That's clearly my arm, because you can see how it's moving. That's my hand. These strobe lines here are clearly these marks on my shirt, which is another reason why I chose this particular clip, because you can really see these bits here. Do you see what I mean? So you can see my hand moving there. This is this sort of exposure of the whole thing, as you can see. And then you can even, if you look at it, you can even see that's the clock there, which is the sort of slightly darker bit. This is me here. And if you look closely, you can even sometimes see this guy's like head and stuff like that. You know, it's all quite interesting. So anyway, just as a reminder then, because we did cover this in the session in terms of like the actual the theory bit before the session, but just as a reminder, the three things that we're looking at with color correction and sort of color grading in principle are the hue of the image, so what the color tone of the image is, or what the color tone of a particular part of the image is, the saturation of that color tone, and then also the luminosity or the luma of that part of the image or the image itself. And this is what we're looking at here. The luma is basically just how bright the image is, effectively, you know, so it's sort of to do with the sort of the black and white aspect of the image, if you like, and then this is to do with the color. So what we're going to do first of all is we want to try and get our image working well from an exposure point of view. So over here on our basic correction, we've got blacks and whites and shadows and highlights. The way it works is that blacks is about like the sort of the black point of the image, whites is the white point, and then shadows is how quickly or how steeply it goes from mid-tone greys to dark greys and blacks. You know, so how sort of contrasty it looks. So what you want to do then really is, first of all, with an image like this, you want to make sure that your blacks are kind of sitting a little bit above that zero. So if I drag it down to there, can you see how my blacks are now on that zero line? So we want to bring that up so that it's hovering just a bit below the 0 point. Okay, and it's the same at the top. We want to take our whites and we want to bring our whites down a bit so that they're nicely below that 100 point. What this means is that we've got no specifically black pixels in our image. Everything's a little bit brighter than that, so that gives us a bit more control. And it's the same with the whites. There's no purely white pixels in this. Everything's sort of got slightly color cast. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're also going to use our shadows slider. And can you see how as I move our shadows slider, can you see how the luma graph is changing? So I'm bringing some of those mid-range shadows down into the darker areas, you see. So if I do that, it darkens it off, but it's still not fully black. We can see that on the luma, even though it perhaps looks black to our eyes. The luma scope is telling us that there's no actual black pixels in there. It's still just really dark, but that's too dark. We don't want that. We just want to sort of just make a nice sort of slightly inky contrast. And it's the same with the highlights. We're just going to push some of these mid-range tones up into the slightly brighter tones. And what I'm actually going to do as well as this is I'm going to use a curves tool here. You could use exposure and contrast to do the same thing, but I think curves gives you a bit more control. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to curves, and I'm just going to push up this center here. I'm just basically going to push all these mid-range tones slightly brighter. Okay, so that just lifts the image, I think, a little bit. It just makes it a little bit more visible. It makes it slightly easier to see everything, but it also washes out some of these greys. So what I'm also going to do is come back here and just bring those back down to that center line again. You know, so the whole thing's a bit brighter, but we still got those slightly darker parts. And we can still see that we are, you know, it's beginning to get quite heavy on that lower line, but it's not too bad, so it's okay at the moment. The next thing we're going to do is we're now going to just come back up to our basic correction, and we're just going to color. We're going to adjust the color to make sure the color is nice and balanced as well. Okay, so this is where our RGB parade comes in. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at our RGB parade in terms of our values of red, green and blue. And we can see if we look through the image and find a point where there's a clear line, so something like that, for example, we can see that this bit here on the blue graph is lower than it is on the red graph, and that's the green graph, and that's lower again than it is on the red graph. So there's more red in here than there is green, and more green than blue. Okay, and what we want to do before we color grade is we want to get those values the same, so that when we're color grading, we're not fighting against an existing color cast. So the best way to do this, you can do it by eye, you know, to do with like the actual temperature of the image and so on and so on. But the easiest way to begin with is just to use this dropper tool and find a point on the image which is white. So just like you would with a camera. So I'm going to go to this point on my guitar, for example. I'm going to try and say, right, that's white. And now I'm going to look at my image and I'm going to say, right, that red line is near as damn it the same height as the green one, and near as damn it the same height as the blue one. So that's pretty much done it. I could try it again if I want to. I could try my dropper again on a different parts. I might try my t-shirt, see if that makes it any better. No, that's not quite as good, because you can see the red is still higher than the green and blue a little bit. So I'm going to reset that and use my dropper again. Oops. There we go. I'm going to go to a point on my guitar which is nice and white, and there we go. So that's pretty much, you know, roughly the sort of same. Yeah. So that's our image then. We've got it kind of, the exposure is looking pretty good, and the color balance is looking pretty good. It doesn't, I don't mean the image itself looks good, as I say, it just means it's nice and kind of prepared for our color grade. Okay. So what we're going to try and do now then is we're going to do what we call a teal split. So this is a nice way of rescuing an image like this, which is kind of flat looking and a bit uninspiring and a bit uninteresting. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to be using this tool here, the HSL secondary tool. Okay, but before we do that, what we're going to do, because we might want to use this on multiple clips, we've only got the one clip, but we might want to use this on multiple clips, is we're going to keep our color correction on this clip itself. So the color correction is specific to the clip, and then we're going to do something which might be useful for multiple clips. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to right click somewhere here in our project panel. We're going to select new item, and we're going to select an adjustment layer. Okay, and this adjustment layer is going to go over the top of our clip. And what we can do is we can basically drag that for as many clips as we've got. We can drag that adjustment layer and it will affect everything that's below it. Okay, so I'm just going to drag that to the end here now, and it's my adjustment layer that I'm going to use to do this teal split. What is a teal split? Well, the idea is that we try and separate skin tones from the background by keeping the skin tones the way they are and changing the background to a more sort of teal or bluey kind of look, which helps us to kind of makes the image look a little bit more dramatic. It adds a bit of drama to it and a bit more interest, okay, as we shall see. So what we're going to do is we're going to come through, once we've added our adjustment layer, and making sure that our adjustment layer, not our clip, is highlighted. It's the adjustment layer, and we're going to move through to a point on the image where we can kind of see all of me and I'm moving and whatever. Okay, so we can kind of see all my skin tones here. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to come over to our HSL secondary tab, and we're going to set the color that we want to use using this first dropper. And I'm going to find a point on my skin which is a sort of average skin tone, so maybe something like this on my arm, for example, something like that. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to click this box here next to the color gray drop down, and what this is now doing is it's isolating my skin tone. I can now use my hue. Remember, hue is the color cast of the image. Saturation is how vibrant or how saturated the color is, and then luma is kind of how bright that color is. And I can use these sliders to try to encompass as much of my skin tone as I can while excluding other shades. So I don't want to use this slider too much, because otherwise I'm going to start adding in other color tones like yellows and greens and things like that, which is not what I want. What I can do then is I can move these around like so, and then spread them out like that. And I might move this one, spread that one out. You see what's happening is I'm trying to grab as many of the color tones as I can. And sometimes you get this right straight away, and sometimes you don't. And it's just one of those things that just requires a bit of, there we go, a bit of playing with it until you get it just the way you want it. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm not going to sport with your patience by spending a lot of time on this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it pretty much at that. So there are some issues with this that I can see, such as the hole in my ear, for example, and bits and pieces. But as I say, you can spend your time on this, and like yesterday when we were doing it in the session, I just did it in a couple of seconds and got it bang on. But of course, as I'm doing it as a tutorial, it's not working as well, because you know that's just law, isn't it? But if I try and pull it out a bit, yeah. Anyway, well, I've got most of my skin tone here. Okay, and of course you're going to get things like the shirt and stuff like that as well, but let's just go with that for now. All right. Then what you're going to do is you're going to select the opposite. So we're not selecting the skin tone now, we're selecting everything that isn't the skin tone. Okay, so by clicking this button, we're now selecting the inverse. Okay, and then what we can do is we can turn off our color gray image, and now we're selecting everything that isn't a skin tone, and I can take my HSL secondary and drag that down into a more sort of teal look. And can you see what's happening to our image is that now everything that isn't a skin tone is now becoming cooler, and we've immediately therefore got a little bit of drama within this, haven't we? So this is making the image look a little bit more dramatic, you know, just because it's pulling that skin tone out. It's making the whole thing feel a little bit more like it's been possibly even professionally lit or something like that. I mean, not obviously it doesn't look really like that, but it's got that sort of sense of, hold on a minute, there's something not quite normal here, you know. And I think that just, it gives it that sense of presence, doesn't it, that you can use for rescuing a clip of this sort. See, so as you can go through it and you can kind of find those points where there's problematic areas. So like when I did my strumming at the start, you perhaps saw there's moments on my arm there, isn't there, where I've not quite got the skin tone right. So I can go back into my where are we? There we go. I can go back into here and I can sort of brighten that up a little bit and try and grab a bit more of that skin tone or whatever, you know. So you can still continue to refine it afterwards if you want to. Okay, but anyway, so that's a nice useful way of doing an interesting teal color split, which is a good place to start when it comes to rescuing footage. Right then, the next thing we're just going to do quickly as the final kind of aspect of this tutorial is just to start to think about using blend modes to create interesting techniques. Actually, the first thing we'll do before that, this clip isn't too bad for it, but other clips you'll notice do end up with, once you've added this teal split, you end up with kind of slightly tealy shadow areas, which is perhaps not what you always want. Okay, so what we're going to do is, this is where I need my effect controls back. So I'm going to bring my effect controls back up, so there they are. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here into my effects library. So I'm going to go into video effects and I'm going to go into color correction, and I'm actually going to bring another lumetri color over onto this adjustment layer, just because it's slightly easier to do it, you know, in multiple effects rather than just the same one. Okay, so this is the second lumetri color that I'm now adding to this adjustment layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up into the curves tab. Okay, and you can see now that this is a new effect because the curves, you know, oh no, I didn't do that with the adjustment layer, did we? So that's fine. The curves shouldn't be changing at all. Ignore that. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to come down to this one, which is the luma versus saturation curve. Okay, and what this effectively is doing is saying, right, brightness versus the saturation of the colors within the image. And of course what we're trying to do is we're trying to desaturate with this. We're trying to desaturate the darker parts of the image so that they don't have that teal cast to them. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're just going to make a mark here, and then we're just going to drag this down. Okay, if we drag the whole thing down, look, the whole thing becomes desaturated, which isn't what we want. So we can bring that up so that it's to the sort of the mid-tone, or even a bit more, to sort of saturate it if we like. And the key thing is what we want to do is just bring that towards the end, and then anything that's in that kind of darker, can you see that slightly changing? So as I drag it that way, can you see how this panel here has got that blue cast? And as I drag it that way, gradually that blue cast goes away, and now that's just looking kind of black. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing we can do if we want to get rid of just that color cast on some of those shadow areas. Okay, so as I say, that's a way of beginning with this. What we're going to now do is just have a think about ways of using this clip as a sort of in terms of transfer modes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my project tab. I'm going to pick up my original clip and drag that over to here. Okay, and then just for quickness, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my basic correction. I could apply a black and white filter, but I'm just going to desaturate it just for quickness. Okay, and I can sort of push my exposure a little bit and maybe my contrast up a bit, you know, just to sort of create this bed. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this black and white bed to fit underneath my original clip. So if I highlight these and move them up and then slide, in fact, first of all, I'm going to highlight that and Command L, to unlink it so that we don't double up on the audio. I'm going to slide that in like so. So now at the moment you can't see that because obviously this clip is over the top. But if I now go to this clip here, I'll highlight them both actually, and if I now go to my effect controls, actually no, multiple clips selected, can't do that. I'm going to go to my blend mode. What I can do is I can take my, in the opacity aspect of this color clip here, the blend mode, what I can do is I can select different blend modes to blend my color clip that I've just created with that black and white layer that I've just added. Yeah. So in terms of blend modes, the way they work is you've got your normal blends. So normal is just no blending at all, and dissolve is just when you change the opacity slider, it dissolves rather than just fades. You've got your darkening blend modes where they take the darker part of the image to be blended and kind of blend that in, or lighter parts where they take the lighter part of the image to be blended and blend that in. Your complex ones which blend in different ways, and then you've got ones that, as you can see, exclude, so make a difference between the clip on the top and the clip below, or that they add something to the clip below from the clip on top. You know, so you just play around with different kind of blend modes and see where you end up. So you can try soft light, which will sort of wash the whole thing out. You could try lightening it up, so adding it so you've got this sort of kind of washed out kind of look, whatever. You know, so there's a number of different things you can try. So I'm going to just go with overlay for now, for that sort of grungy, bleach bypassy kind of look, you know. And it also means that, I mean, if you don't like how heavy that is, you can come to this black and white layer, and you could just adjust the opacity of that so that you're sort of building that black and white layer in. You could do this with controls, of course, but I just like the way that it interplays together with the layer below it. You know, it's just a nice way of doing it. And then the final thing that I like to do personally with a clip like this, especially if it's like a kind of clip like this with this sort of, this kind of like tone of voice, it's a rocky kind of, you know, environment or whatever, and it's kind of got a lot of noise. You either try and denoise it, or you just lean into it, to be honest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my black and white layer and paste that over here. And here's my new black and white layer, okay, which is slightly opaque. I'm going to actually take the opacity down even more to like sort of 30%, something like that. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my effects, okay, and I'm going to go to blur and sharpen, and I'm just going to add a sharpen filter to this one, okay, and then I'm going to drag this up over the top of everything else, so we can do that. And what this will do is it'll sharpen up this top image, and it'll also sharpen up some of that noise, and you're either going to try and get rid of the noise, or you just lean into it, just make it a thing. And so that's what I've chosen to do here, is actually sharpen that top image and just make that noise into an effect, you know, so that it actually kind of adds something to the clip itself. Do you see what I mean? So now what we've got is we've got an image which is being color graded with our teal split. We've added that over a black and white layer to give it a bit of presence, and then we put our kind of quite opaque black and white layer over the top just to add some sharpness and definition to the whole thing, because you know what it's like when you've got kind of noise and bad lighting conditions, is you just don't have that kind of that crisp definition that we might want. Sometimes it can be quite interesting to add a blur effect to, you know, a very subtle blur effect to this black and white layer. Let's just see what happens if we try that. So if we add a Gaussian blur to this clip here and just see what that might do. I mean, it doesn't always work, but sometimes it just adds a certain amount of something. I think I've got my settings to the point where you can't really see it particularly. Yeah, so you can see it now that it's soft because it's blending in with that blurred layer underneath. Yeah, it's probably a bit too much really. So go to about sort of 12, 11, 12, something like that. Then you can kind of see that underneath it. And then that's our teal layer, and then that's our sharpness layer over the top. Yeah, and that sharpness layer is kind of washing out some of that color, which is fine. I don't mind that, but I might also change the blend mode of the sharpness layer as well. So I might change that to like overlay or something, or I could change that to screen or whatever, you know, and then that will kind of again add a slightly different blend mode effect to the overall image. So hopefully what you can see is we've got our, if I bring our, perhaps doesn't look like a great deal, but if I bring our original clip in over the top, you can see the difference, can't you? If I play this through, you can see how it looks and then what it's color graded to, you know. So I'm not saying that we've rescued it by making the new clip a whole lot better. I'm just saying that let's take some of that noise away, unlink that. just so we can see what we're doing. Yeah, I'm not we haven't taken the noise away or drastically improved the clip, but what we have done is just taken something that's a bit muddy and a bit kind of soft and a bit kind of underwhelming and just made it a bit more interesting, haven't we? So hopefully you found that useful and interesting. Obviously there's a lot more you can do with color grading, so we can kind of go into that in a bit more detail, or we can look at other members of staff who are kind of professional color graders who can sort of take you through it if you get really interested in this stuff. But it's a sort of an opening gambit, if you like, in terms of color grading. So let me know if you have any questions, and yeah, hopefully you get on all right, and we'll see what you come up with. Oh, by the way, the vector scope, which I didn't explain earlier, that's to do with the saturation of the colors in the image. So this is like this sort of the color wheel, if you like, and then this tells you how saturated the colors in the sequence are, or in the image are that we're looking at. Okay, cool. Right then, I think I'll leave it there. But yes, let me know how you get on, and I hope it all goes well. Nice one.